This is the American Muckrakers podcast, Muck You. I'm David Wheeler in Spruce Pine, North Carolina, here to gut the lies and spill the filthy truth. My co-host Moe Davis is running to be the next Congress dude from NC11, coming to us live today from Asheville. Is there any other Asheville in the world? I don't know why I'm saying North Carolina.
I don't think, not that I know of.
All right, Moe, let's get mucking, man.
All right. Well, welcome back, everybody, and hope you're having a good day. It's kind of a cloudy, rainy, cool day here in the mountains of western North Carolina, but still there's not a better place to be. And again, we're continuing our tradition of having great guests on to keep you informed on what's going on a range of topics. And today we've got CJ Warnke, who is the communications director for the House Majority PAC and House Majority Forward. Before that, he worked with both Senators Gary Peters and Amy Klobuchar, so certainly is eminently qualified to talk a little bit about politics today. So, CJ, thanks for taking time to join us.
Thanks for having me on. I appreciate you both taking the time today.
Oh, sure. Well, listen, why don't you start out by just, if you would, for our listeners that probably may not be familiar with, House Majority PAC and House Majority Forward, just tell them a little bit about the two organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. So House Majority PAC is the House Democratic Leadership Aligned Super PAC. Our primary function is to win as many congressional races as possible. This involves a lot of paid advertising on our end and investment in candidates across the country. You've probably seen, if you live in a competitive congressional district, our TV ads, our mailers, our digital ads, really driving a contrast between a Democrat who is going to deliver for you locally and a Republican who is not going to deliver for you in any way, shape, or form. And then House Majority Forward is our 501c4 affiliate. It is an issue advocacy organization, focuses a lot on trying to, urge folks to support or oppose certain pieces of legislation, and puts out this kind of messaging guidance, is what we call it, on a lot of what's happening in the world today, including some cost of living stuff that we've done recently, and we can dive into that. But most recently on Monday, we announced ads 26 congressional districts across the country, talking about the House GOP budget bill, specifically, driving the message of these Medicaid cuts are pretty bad. They're going to raise the cost of your groceries and cut your health care. And, when you couple that with the support for tariffs up and down the board, House Republicans and Trump are kind of just running on a policy of raising costs on American families and urging folks to oppose this bill, call their local House members, call their local senators, and tell them to vote this bill down, because it is clearly not going to be a fruitful piece of legislation for regular Americans. It's going to do really well for guys like Elon Musk's and the ultra rich of this country, but it's not going to do great for American families. So that is kind of just like a quick macro look at our two organizations real quick.
Right. Well, you mentioned there are 26 House members that you put out ads on Monday that you're targeting. And
Yeah.
So when did you realize that Chuck Edwards is one of the 26 worst members of Congress?
Chuck Edwards, too. I mean, obviously, both of you know this race really well. And I know all of your work to get Madison Cawthorn out of this seat a few years ago. And, Chuck Edwards ran on, I'm going to be this guy who's going to focus on the local stuff in the way Madison Cawthorn didn't. And he's kind of really broken that promise. There is, just alone on his support for tariffs. I know a lot of folks in that area are trying to still rebuild after the hurricane. And thanks to Trump's tariffs, lumber prices are up, steel prices are up. It's making it tougher to build, not just in North Carolina, but across the country. And these are like direct prices that are affecting families. And this is a policy that Chuck Edwards wholeheartedly supports. And it is like kitchen table issues, right? Very, very important. And then you see, he's creating a lot of drama now, similar to Madison Cawthorn. I've read some great local reporting about staff turnover in his office, and it doesn't seem like he's really has a good hold on staff retention in a way that can really help deliver for the constituents out there in North Carolina 11.
Yeah. Well, he was in the state legislature for quite a while before he went to Congress. And while he was in the state legislature, he was one of the leading advocates against Medicaid expansion. And it was so bad. The reddest county out here in Western North Carolina is Graham County. I think they voted 85% for Trump in November. But the county commission, which are not exactly bleeding heart liberals, got in the car and drove to Raleigh, to the state capitol, and told Chuck and his colleagues, "Look, you're hurting our folks out here. We need this." And they finally passed it. But included in the bill, it says if the federal reimbursement rate ever drops below 90%, then the Medicaid expansion goes away. So this big, beautiful wealth transfer bill that he signed off on, there are potentially 50 or 60,000 people out here that'll lose their health care coverage. And it's hard to paint that in a positive light for ordinary folks.
As you're saying, Medicaid is not really a partisan political issue. It is oftentimes a necessary benefit that a lot of people pay into, and a lot of people have worked really hard to have. And it's keeping families afloat. It's keeping people healthy. It is one of the most important functionary roles of the U.S. government right now, that directly back to the American people. And Republicans want to try to say they're always making sure that families and working people get the best benefit out of Republican governance. But this is a direct, we're taking money out of your pocket. We're making it tougher for you to access affordable health care. And, but we're going to give these guys another tax break, so they can afford the fourth or fifth yacht this time around, because three is not enough. Yeah. And, on top of that too, a lot of these healthcare cuts in this bill are threatening to shut down rural hospitals, which are, far and few between as is now, and serve a lot of folks in so it's really just more than taking away the direct benefits. It's making it harder to get access to any type of healthcare, to even see a doctor to begin with.
Right. Yeah, I know it is. He puts out a periodic newsletter, and in it, the last one, he was extolling the virtues of the big, beautiful bill, saying that virtually every income bracket gets a tax cut, which is literally true. But the deceptive part is he doesn't tell you if you earn below $51,000 a year, that your couple $100 tax break is more than offset by your loss of SNAP and Medicaid and all the other benefits that are going to be taken away from you. So it's a net loss.
Yeah.
Where folks at the top, if you're in the top 0.1%, that's people that make $4.25 million a year and more, their benefit is going to be about $390,000, which is the median price of a house out in Western North Carolina. So, the rich are getting a free house every year paid for on the backs of those at the bottom of the ladder.
Yeah. And, they try to frame it as a common sense bill. But this is, if you look back to 2018, this is exactly what they tried to do when they tried to attempt to repeal the Affordable Care Act. Was they were saying, no, you're going to be fine. Your pre-existing conditions are going to be protected. We're just removing the bad stuff, right? Which was obviously not true then and not true now. They were running ads with their moms in 2018 saying, my son would never rip away coverage for people with pre-existing conditions, even though they absolutely did. So I think, luckily for us, we're seeing that most people are not really buying that this bill is going to help them. When you compare it to Trump's tax bill from 2017, 2018, this bill is already more unpopular than the tax bill was at the same point. So I think, Democrats have done a really good job about driving down approval of this bill and really drawing a stark contrast. We have, I know a lot of folks don't necessarily tune into congressional hearings, but Democrats in Ways and Means Committee, Democrats in Energy and Commerce Committee, who were engrossed in this bill and the repercussions that it would have on regular people, were fighting tooth and nail throughout the night to make sure that they were at least going to hold Republicans accountable for voting for this, calling them out and dragging it on and making it as painful as a vote as possible. So, obviously, Republicans were still able to pass it through the House. You see a lot of resistance in the Senate. When you have me agreeing with a guy like Josh Hawley about how House Republicans are going crazy cutting Medicaid, you're kind of in a bizarre world on GOP policy.
Yeah, I know. I found myself, people that just historically I've been 180 degrees, like Laura Loomer. I was in agreement with her on Trump's accepting the emoluments from Qatar, the big 747 palace in the sky, and Elon Musk, bashing the bill for adding to the debt and the deficit. It's funny who you find again, like you were saying, when I'm agreeing with Rand Paul, I have to stop and think, wait a minute, where am I wrong on this? But you mentioned the Affordable Care Act, and there are two things I'd mention on that. One is, remember the Republicans were saying the Democrats rammed this through and they didn't even bother to read the bill. It's interesting. Marjorie Taylor Greene whining about well, gee, I didn't read the bill and I didn't know some of the stuff was in there that I don't like. And you mentioned,
And it wasn't just her. It was also Mike Flood in Nebraska got caught in a town hall. He had to admit he didn't read a provision by that was read out loud by a constituent. So it's clearly, this is they're all afraid to say it, but none of them have really read this legislation.
right. Well, we talked about the roughly the Congressional Budget Office, which again is nonpartisan, says about 5.2 million people will lose their Medicaid coverage. But you mentioned the Affordable Care Act, and the tweaks they're making to it will knock another 4.2 million people off of their Affordable Care Act coverage. So when you add those two together and combine it with the 27.1 million people that already are uninsured, that's going to be 11% of the American population that is without health care. And I just don't know how you pitch that in a positive light.
Yeah, I think that's why you see a lot of Republicans not holding town halls when they go home for recess anymore. They all tried it. That's the one thing I got to give some credit to Chuck Edwards is at least he's doing a little bit here and there. I don't think they're successful in any way, shape, or form, and they're really showing him to be out of touch, which is helpful for us. But most folks aren't even meeting with their constituents at this point anymore. And that's how you know when something's unpopular. If you're hiding from the people who put you in office, things are not right. Whereas you have now a ton of Democrats across the country having to meet with Republican constituents in these districts across the country. You see Ro Khanna doing it. You see Tim Walz doing it, just traveling across the country, showing up because Republicans aren't showing up. And I think that really does resonate with people if you can sustain it over a long period.
So, Mo, I have a question for you. It's your co-host. When you're elected, are you going to support Hakeem Jeffries?
Yeah, I think he's, it's tough being in the minority. I mean, there's only so much you can do. I know folks that have a lot of, high expectations, but if you don't have the majority, your hands are largely tied. So I think he's doing the best he can with the tools that he's got.
I think a lot of credit of holding Democrats together on all these votes goes to Leader Hakeem Jeffries. I think he has been a powerful voice for that caucus and has held folks united and focused on the mission of Republicans are raising your prices and we're going to fight for the benefits that you deserve. And I think that's really starting to resonate with people. This is going to be a key issue in so many competitive congressional districts across the country. And come next year. I mean, you look at a place to go to the opposite end of the country. California 22 has close to 350,000 Medicaid recipients, and that's currently represented by David Valadao, and he only squeaked it out by a few points in 2024. So that immediately becomes one of the most hot issues in a race like that across. And that's replicable in so many races across the country. And then you also can bring in an economic argument. Kitchen table issues around tariffs of how all your prices are going up thanks to your local Republicans supporting Trump's tariffs. It's a pretty deadly combo that we see popping a lot in research because there are things we can directly point to be like Republicans are actively trying to ruin your life.
Well, and they don't. I'm not sure that they are actively trying to ruin our lives. I just think they don't give a shit. I mean, they could care one whip about most people. And Trump has certainly fomented a lot of that. But so, CJ, one of the things I really like, leader, soon-to-be Speaker Jeffries, is his measured approach. I worked for Tom Vilsack, had a similar approach to politics and governing. I worked for Barack Obama in the campaign as a lowly advanced guy. He did the same thing. He's kind of, we had a short conversation while he was senator and still running. And I said, hey, how do you keep the patience? Somebody's, whacking you over the head with a 2x4 to come up with a measured response. And he said, David, one of the things I learned was let your opponent dig their own. Mm-hmm. And when they're banging on me with stuff that doesn't make sense, keep doing that. So I think Hakeem Jeffries, Leader Jeffries, has a similar philosophy. Am I far off?
No, and I think Republicans have are already started digging a pretty deep hole on themselves on legislation, and now this is the time for us to go off on offense on that. I'm a frequent watcher of Leader Hakeem's press conference, and he was going off yesterday on the tax provisions of this scam and how it's ripping away healthcare from millions of everyday Americans. How it's just so completely out of touch with normal people because Republicans promised on the campaign trail. I'm sure you both remember last year that on day one they would lower costs, and now they're making up all sorts of excuses of saying, well, we can't lower grocery prices. That's just like not a thing we can do, even though we promised it. And I think the leader is doing a really good job of using their own words against. And now that we have some votes under our belts on what these Republicans are doing, now's the time to go on offense and draw the stark contrast of here's what Democrats stand for, here's what Republicans stand for. And the leader too, there was a great NBC article about this the other day, has been anywhere and everywhere to talk about this message. I mean, he went on, he's, obviously goes on your regular cable shows, but he's also on Stephen A. Smith. So he's really trying to reach as many people as possible with this message and driving this contrast of who's actually standing with regular American working people. And I think it's proving to be a pretty effective strategy.
Well, my good friend Moe has, he's announced soon, and I've seen a preview of an ad. And Moe, can I use the tagline? Am I going to get in trouble?
No,
so part of it is kicking ass for the working class. I really like that. I think it's short and sweet. It makes sense, especially here in the mountains. And I think the more that we can focus on the working class again, which, for God's sakes, we're the party of FDR and Truman and JFK and Johnson created these terrific programs that still exist despite the Republican efforts to tear them up. They're still around. And here's my prediction: they ain't going to touch Social Security. They ain't going to touch Medicaid. I promise you that. They may try, but I just don't think it's going to go anywhere, because those are programs. They have survived a lot worse assaults than these knuckleheads. So you talked a little bit about going on the offensive. I'm a big fan of pointing out facts about your opponent without editorializing, but just let the voters decide if face humping your cousin is the sort of congressman you want or not. And we've gotten in a little bit of trouble here and there, but we have survived as well. So who are we going to go on the offensive? Who is your PAC 25? Obviously, you've got a target list. You said 26 vulnerables. Let's highlight a couple of these sons of bitches. And one of my favorites is Mary Meeks Miller of Iowa. Tell me about this woman.
Yeah, so Marinette Miller Meeks, she represents Iowa 1 currently, barely won her reelection against a stellar candidate named Christina Bohannon. And this was a district that Trump won by multiple points that Marinette Miller Meeks barely squeaked out by a few hundred votes. She's incredibly unpopular with Republicans and Democrats, and we see this as a district that is a key flip opportunity come November of next year. House Majority Forward did some favorable and approval rating research on her earlier in February, and we found that a majority of her constituents have an unfavorable rating of her, and only 26% have a favorable rating of her, and nearly half of her constituents disapprove of her job performance. So what she's doing out there is not working. And, I think Iowa is a very interesting state in general because Republicans have gutted education funding out there. They're gutting healthcare funding. And that's why you think, you see candidates like Christina Bohannon in Iowa, and you see candidates like Rob Sand out there in Iowa have a decent chance of making some real flips, because they have seen what happens when you have Republicans in charge for a long time. And it is completely gutting institutions in that state and driving people out of there.
Yeah, I grew up in Iowa, CJ, and I was well, I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing, but I'm a product of the public school system. And, we never fought about funding for schools. The thing we fought about was bonding issues because they're all local. But, there was at one point, I think either the Constitution or it was written into law that 50% of the state budget had to be spent on education. And they've certainly fallen off that wagon due to Kim Reynolds and Terry Branstad and some of these other knuckleheads out there. But how do we get rid of, I call her quadruple M, Mary Miller Meeks is mean, because she's mean, man. There was a video of her where there was a guy advocating for, I think it was Medicaid, keeping the Medicaid program. And she just blew him off and walked into an elevator and gave him a scowl. Where do these people come from, these Republicans? Because she could have easily just stopped in the hall and said, hey, listen, I'm on the way to a committee meeting. Why don't we sit down after this and have a heart-to-heart discussion? I'm happy to give you. Instead, she just walks down the hall, ignores the guy, stands at the elevator, scowls at the guy. Where do these Republicans come from? Are they, dragons that are being dredged up out of cemeteries? Where do these people come from?
I mean, I think it just goes to show the level of disdain they have for normal people and how out of touch they've become. When you are in oftentimes a more gerrymandered district, you're hearing a lot of things in an echo chamber. There are Democratic echo chambers, but there are also a lot of Republican echo chambers, and you're really insulating yourself from the problems of normal working people in your district and across the country. And I think, when you finally get confronted for something that is going to hurt people, you don't want to see that. You don't have to deal with that. And I think that often means you just want to run away from it. There was in October of last year a great video of a reporter from New Jersey trying to interview Tom Kean Jr., who represents New Jersey 7, another swing district. And the reporter was just asking for a comment on a story. Tom Kean Jr. just kept walking, wouldn't say anything. The reporter just kept asking questions. Do you want to talk about the Mets or Yankees, how they played this past weekend? He wouldn't say anything for 2 minutes straight until he disappeared behind a doorway. So I think these people just don't care and don't respect any type of accountability. And really, the only thing they're ever going to respond to is being voted out at the ballot box, which is, again, why we are so focused on flipping as many seats as possible.
Well, CJ, I think one thing that David and I can do that would really be helpful for the party. We had Adam Kinzinger on, we've had Joe Walsh, we've had David Jolly, who were all Republican members of Congress at one point. And since then, David Jolly's now running for governor in Florida
I saw that
as a Democrat. Joe Walsh announced this week that he is now a registered Democrat. Adam Kinzinger on our show said that he's certainly not welcome in the Republican Party if the Democrats had a little broader aperture, that he could see himself being a Democrat. So David and I have had a pretty good track record of converting Republicans to Democrats. So if you could steer more Republicans our way, I think we can shift the tide here.
Yeah, I think, in any election, there's always kind of there's multiple factors, but two that always stick out are mobilization, making sure the solid Dem voters show up, and persuasion. And, these congressional races are really ground zero for persuasion. This is how, a Marie Glueson-Kemp-Perez in Washington 3 is able to win re-election. This is how Jared Golden in Maine 2, a district that voted for Trump by close to 10 points, Jared Golden is able to run and win so many multiple times, no matter what Republicans throw at him. It is the most important messengers for Democrats are these actual Democratic electeds and candidates who can talk directly to the local issues back at home. When we run ads and when I read coverage in every congressional district in the country, they're not really talking back home about national politics. They're talking about Jared Golden in Maine is talking to the lobstermen out there and how to keep their businesses alive. To go back to North Carolina, Rep. Don Davis in Eastern North Carolina is talking about local small businesses in North Carolina 1 and what he can do to make sure that the local economies are flourishing in the best way possible and delivering for his constituents, no matter whether you have a D or R next to your name. So I think it really is on candidates who know their districts better than anybody else, better than any DC consultant could ever know their districts. Because when a candidate knows their districts, they drive a message and are able to outperform not great environments. I mean, what we were saying before, we ended up flipping 3 districts. A net gain of 3 districts in 2024. We picked up House seats, and a lot of that was through our candidates, guys like Derek Tran out in California 45 beat a longtime Republican incumbent, Michelle Steele, because he was able to tell a story to the Vietnamese community out in that district and convert a lot of Vietnamese voters who were also voting for Trump to vote for him. So it really starts at a candidate level and communicating locally, talking about local issues, because, kitchen table issues is a term, but people sit down at the kitchen table and talk about bills. I know, like I did with my fiance over the weekend, and trying to figure out your own budget. And I think that's where a lot of local electeds running for Congress can plug in to help you really make those conversations a little bit easier and save you some money.
Yeah. Hey Mo, can I jump in here a sec?
Sure.
So, and if you would have said no, I would have anyway. But CJ, so I just want to challenge you to reach out. Why don't you reach out to those folks? Jolly, Walsh, and Kinzinger. Let's activate these folks. If this, and I posted this, and I'm glad you brought this up, Mo. This is really a good point. I posted on X yesterday and Blue Sky. If the Democrat Party can't figure out a way to activate to the tent, we're dead. I mean, let's be honest. We've got people willing. They've been on the record. These guys are proud, former elected officials that, they've got egos too, but they have sucked it up and they're willing to go on the record and state publicly that they are aligning with the Democratic Party. In Joe's case, come Democrat. Let's find districts for Walsh and Kinzinger to run in and fund them.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think,
what are we 3 away from having a majority? Kinzinger could win.
And I think a lot of that goes back to, especially when you talk about Jolly in Florida, is the gerrymandering problem we have across this country, where Republican legislatures have just, and you guys have experienced this firsthand in North Carolina last year, right? Where Republican legislatures are cutting out really good candidates and not making it possible for folks to run in a lot of districts. When Trump wins a district by 30, even in a Democratic leaning year, it's not an easy win necessarily. But I agree with you. Like we've always been a Big Tent party, right? Having voices of
not really sometimes.
Well, having voices that range is important. I come from a family of mostly Republicans, and I think what helps my argument to the Republican members of my family is when I can point out these Adam Kinzingers of the world, the David Jollies of the world, of folks who are like, you agree with basically everything that this person says, and this person is saying that Democrats are the better bet. So I think there's absolutely room for them. Again, I think gerrymandering is our biggest issue on the congressional end for sure. And obviously,
okay, but CJ, sorry to interrupt, but I'm really bad about that. But
no
but
worries.
Listen, let's look at Kinzinger. He has a place in Texas. He has a place in Illinois. Find a goddamn and I realize you can't wave a wand and just make all this happen. But
I wish I did.
You could be the starting point. Find a district for Kinzinger to run in, for God's sakes, and we're down to two to get the speakership. And the other thing I'm just going to broadcast and I'll actually let our guest speak, but is if Speaker and his staff have not called these guys, they need to check their sanity, and they've got to figure out how to harness these guys to help us win.
Listen, I think there's 100% always conversations to be had about this, right? Like, and we're a group too, as I said at the top of this. Our sole focus is on winning, so we don't rule anything out. So I think it's an idea we're definitely open to exploring this year and next year as well. I think obviously too, that's up to the candidates. You could ask a person to run for Congress; they may not necessarily always want to run, but it's definitely I agree with you. It is 100% a conversation worth it.
You mentioned gerrymandering, and particularly, North Carolina is truly a purple state. I mean, we have 3 times in a row voted for Trump, and 3 times in a row voted for a Democratic governor. It truly is purple. But our in the last Congress, it was 7 Republicans, 7 Democrats in North Carolina, which is reflective of the makeup of North Carolina. And as you said, the Republican legislature through creative draftsmanship is now 10-4. So that just here in North Carolina, but for gerrymandering, the House of Representatives would be virtually a dead heat rather than a Republican majority. So you can trace it back here to North Carolina is part of the problem that we're choosing, the Republican legislatures are choosing their voters rather than the voters choosing their representatives.
Yeah, and I think that is a big issue for all of us, not just House folks, but everybody across the party to really have to fight for over the next decade here, right? Because there will be a new redistricting come 2032. We're closer to that than 2020 at this point. And it is going to be obviously a tough fight, which is why, I know David Hogg was on the show 2 weeks ago, and he was talking about the Wisconsin State Supreme Court race. It's why these state Supreme Court races are so important and why we need to be invested, like building a permanent apparatus that is running Democratic candidates always and investing in these communities, because that is the only way we can win in this day and age. A group like us, we went back to work right after the November election this past year to focus on the 2026 elections, because we internally look and see, the one thing you can't buy in this world is time. So you got to get back on the saddle. You can grieve a little bit that you lost, but you got to get back on the saddle right away and get back to work, because it is the only way we are going to be able to, bust these Republican majorities that gerrymander states like North Carolina.
Right. Hey, I don't know if you've seen the ad. It's on the Senate side, but in South Carolina, there's the Dr. Annie Andrews. I don't know if you've seen her launch video where, and for listeners that haven't, Google her name and go watch it. It's really interesting. She's a pediatrician, and in her launch ad, she shows x-rays. She shows an x-ray, so this is a child who has measles-induced pneumonia that could have been prevented with a vaccine. Here's an x-ray of a child with pediatric cancer, and NIH has now been defunded to work on pediatric cancer. Here's a kid with a gunshot wound that's no longer tracked as a major health risk, even though it's the leading cause of death for children. And then she shows an x-ray of a kid with a perforated bowel, and she said, here's a kid that literally is full of shit. And then she shows a picture of Lindsey Graham and said, and here's an adult who's full of shit. It seems like Democrats are my gripe for a number of years has been we go to a knife fight, they show up with an AR-15 and we show up with a quinoa salad. And it seems like that attitude is changing. We are being more forceful and aggressive. Tim Walz was down in South Carolina last weekend and said, Democrats have got to be more forceful. So are you seeing that across the country? Is that something we're doing? We're fighting harder?
In these competitive congressional districts, I'm definitely seeing that. Just to highlight a few Democratic incumbents who are doing that for sure. New York 3, Tom Suozzi, which is a Long Island area seat. That man knows how to fight for that district. And he's also somebody that is, you look at him and he is the perfect fit for his district. Less competitive seat, but in Florida 23, Jared Moskowitz is a great communicator of always holding folks to account. I'm sure you both have seen clips from him tearing apart Republicans in these committee hearings before,
Right.
Just trying to make their lives as brutal as possible.
But he does it with love.
He does it with love, funny. Right?
Yeah, he's great.
And that responds. People like to see things like that. And when you're seeing Democrats being able to tear apart a Republican message and have a little fun with it, it does really respond to people. It looks less forced. It looks less of a talking point. It looks like you're having a normal conversation with people. And so Moskowitz is a great communicator on that end. A guy like in Ohio 1, Greg Landsman is a really great communicator for his district, and is often able to really call out a lot of the BS Republicans are pushing in the state of Ohio. And going back to Annie Andrews, I think one thing that really helps our candidates bring fight to Republicans in these districts is if they have an interesting background. Annie Andrews being a medical professional is an interesting background. We have a ton of doctors in the House Democratic Caucus who are able to tear apart these Republican healthcare messages, their attacks on abortion, they're full of shit messaging, for lack of a better term. And because they're trusted, people in their communities trust their doctors. Another personal favorite of mine is Pat Ryan in New York 18. He is a former veteran. He went to West Point. He represents West Point. And he's done a really good job of running a proactive argument of patriotic populism and just calling out BS, not letting Republicans get away with saying the things that they get to say on the regular. And he's not afraid to do it on MSNBC. And he's a frequent contributor to Fox News and calling them out on that all the time. And I think that's really important. It's not only having the fight, but it's taking the fight to everywhere.
How do you, I think one of the challenges I see for us is that the right wing literally owns social media, and they've beaten the mainstream media largely into submission. So how do we punch through? How do we get our message across when the communication pipes are largely controlled by the other side and they're regulating what gets out to the public?
Yeah, I think there are a few things to be done. One, more investment in a digital apparatus, rapid response wise for Democrats. I think we as a party have really taken a lot of lessons from last year and are implementing that around this time around. Kamala HQ reached a lot of young voters, and I think there is a way to continue to use those strategies and build on those strategies to create an even more effective messaging that breaks through on these social media platforms. We work with a lot of young folks who really understand the algorithms of these spaces too, and I think figuring out how the algorithm is changing in order to tailor a message that pops more. Republicans have been very efficient at that, and I think we're getting much better at that, but it's something we can still stand to improve upon. And then on the Fox News piece, I would say, listen, Democrats have to engage more with these right-wing networks, and not to say that they should just roll over and agree with everything that Republicans are saying on these networks, but you have to bring the fight. And again, that's somebody like Pat Ryan is really good about going on Fox and just absolutely tearing apart a Republican argument. And I've had family members who watch Fox News pretty regularly reach out and be like, this guy's actually pretty sane. Democrats should be elevating. And so I think it's, again, not being afraid to have the fight is the number one priority.
Right. Well, I'm just glad that we're engaging in the fight. I think, for too long we were too passive. And I think the public wants somebody they feel like is going to fight for them and their families. So I'm really happy that we're taking a more aggressive stance. But I think, again, on messaging, I think our party's always been really good at writing 20-page position papers that nobody reads, and the other side comes up with the 3-word bumper sticker that everybody remembers. So I think we're doing a better job there too at finding those hooks that connect with ordinary people rather than using the academic speak that we have used for, I think, too long.
Yeah. I mean, one thing just to touch on that, we've done a lot of what I like to call unconventional message testing, where we're trying to find out there, what people are saying is making their life unaffordable. Because obviously we all know people are saying costs are rising. We all see costs are rising in front of us. We're trying to drive in on what do you think is actually the biggest thing that is costing you more? And one of the top testing things was Americans are paying more for auto, home, and health insurance. And insurance company profits continue to grow. And I think that could be a very interesting proactive contrast that Democrats could talk about: lowering car insurance rates, lowering home insurance rates, finding ways to get cheaper home insurance rates in climate affected areas, like in Florida, California, or even potentially in North Carolina, because that is a cost that people see and think about on an almost daily basis.
For the you had to bring this up, CJ, insurance. I ran for North Carolina's insurance commissioner and flamed out big time. But seriously, that is a big issue, man. And North Carolina is probably, one more storm away from Florida, becoming Florida, where insurance companies are going to start pulling out big time, and Moe and I live in the heart of, the Helene damage here in Western North Carolina. And I haven't seen or heard much on insurance yet, but I'm sure it's coming. But so one of the things that is also a bee in my bonnet, and since I've got you, CJ, unfortunately, You're going to have to live through this, and it's not your fault. I'm interested in your take on this, especially from a donor standpoint, whether large. Marcus Flowers ran against MTG, spent $16 million. Sean Harris, good guy, military guy, ran against MTG, spent $3.5 million donor money. How do we get the message out to donors to stop donating to these sorts of races? And it's not a slight against either of those gentlemen. She wins by 30%. I just did an analysis and posted up on Substack, AmericanMuckrakers.substack.com, on that race. And there is a consistency. She has raised about $18 million over the last 3 cycles. Democrats have raised about 20. The loss percentage has remained the same. We lose by 30% plus every single time, an average of 31. How do we get donors to stop dumping money into those races? And I contrast that with our love for Lauren Boebert out in Colorado. We were an early supporter of Adam Frisch, who listeners certainly know lost by 546 votes. His cost per vote was about $26, which had he had another 50 grand, he could have won that race, I think. How do we get donors, small and large, to focus on the races that matter, that, the year 26 or 23 target?
Yeah, I mean, it is a really good question, because as somebody who works in the most competitive congressional districts across the country, I frequently ask myself the same question, because I always want our candidates to have more money in these toughest races, because I'm trying to win as many races as possible. And I know, obviously, like a Marjorie Taylor Greene general election is not really a viable win for us there. I think, There's been a lot of tough conversations since November about where we're sending money and everything, and that's a much larger conversation to be had. I think it starts on all of us, like folks in the party, of elected officials, calling out when we shouldn't be doing something. There was obviously, I don't know how closely either of you were tracking those Florida special elections earlier this year, but there are a lot of just random PACs popping up down there around those races that weren't really spending money on ads, but the people in charge of the PACs were making a lot of money off of it. And we did some calling out of that afterwards, because it's just like it can't be an acceptable thing to happen anymore if we're really trying to build a larger and larger Democratic majority that is sustainable for multiple years, not just 2 years at a time, but for multiple. So I think it involves a lot of us calling out, and as an ecosystem, not being able to, not necessarily like working with folks who are going to engage in tactics that are, frankly, like, for lack of a better term,
scammy and unethical and antithetical to our charges. Democrats.
And I think Act Blue is doing a lot of good work about scam packs these days.
So I want to challenge you on to join us project. I've been trying to build a database of these sorts of these sorts of scam packs, etc. And there are a lot, and frankly, there are a lot of scammy consultants in Washington and elsewhere. I'd love to build a database where, before you donate to Act Blue on a candidate you don't know, you go to this database and look and see what is the win ratio on the consultant on that race, and how many times is that candidate run? Because, in the case, I'm going to call him out. I'm going to call out Marcus Flowers. He ran that race in Georgia, raised $16 million, took that database and is using it for his own purpose. He's got his own PAC, which he pays himself out of, but he's raising money off of that race from money from donors that never should have given it in the first place, because it wasn't a winnable race. So I would love it. Too,
yeah. When folks do that, it just builds distrust between us
and here we are. And here we are. In contrast that with American Muck. We raise pennies, dude. And we spent about 125 grand on Boebert, came within 546 votes. Now, we had a good candidate, and that wasn't just us, but we contributed to that 450 or 540 vote law in a positive way. And then we did the same thing with Cawthorn. We spent about 150 on him. And again, we weren't the only reason, but we got Democrats to convert to unaffiliated and vote against that motherfucker. And his vote margin was 1,400, Cawthorn.
Yeah.
So why is it that we got to fight for pennies, and we've got a track record? I'd love this database would help the party and help everybody. We struggle to raise pennies.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, I don't envy you as someone who's never had to raise a penny. I'm in a pretty lucky position myself. I will say, one.
Damn you, CJ.
well, more just because it's not a function of my job, I would say.
Yeah. Okay. All right. That's better.
Yeah. I don't have to do that professionally. I will say, one, not that there's really any silver linings to Trump being back in office, but this is a time where I think Democrats, like professionally, the activists, the party as a whole, is exploring a lot of different and new ways to do things. And I kind of come from the camp of no idea is necessarily a bad idea. Everything is worth discussing, because that's oftentimes how you find some truly unconventional ideas that work really well. So I know, obviously, Ken Martin, new DNC chair, is doing a really good job of building this new National Democratic Party. And I think, all options can be on the table with that. As to the raising money aspect, I don't know too much about that, so I can't speak to it. But again, I think the more ideas, the merrier. And I'm happy to also offline with you after this to send you a few names of folks I think should be on your list.
Okay, good. Well, I appreciate that, CJ.
Hey, I'd push back just a little bit on that, because we had David Hogg on. I brought it up with him that it's like yesterday. There's an article came out yesterday about NC11 and it's a North Carolina publication called The Assembly. But in there it quotes Caleb Rudow, who was the candidate last time around. And Caleb was saying that one of his frustrations was that he couldn't get anyone in the party to even answer the phone when he called. So we want somebody to run in every race up and down the ballot. Even the ones it's like David ran up around Spruce Pines, a heavily red area, the Republicans are going to win just because of the math. But my point was, if the party wants somebody to run for every office, then there's got to be some base level of support for those candidates, because, we encourage people to run. And then when they do and they're in a district that's not competitive, it's like, well, you're on your own now. So we can't abandon those people who answer the call and step up, even though they know that it's unlikely they're going to be.
Yeah, this is actually works kind of well with something we are doing internally that I'm really happy to talk about further. So in December of 2024, we announced a recruitment fund and really focused on this from House Majority PAC perspective. When we've seen time and time again, when you are able to field robust candidate operations in districts that are tougher, like a Trump plus 15% district that, in the right environment could flip, but is a pretty tough uphill battle. But if we're able to field a viable candidate who knows how to run a strong race and has like the support around them to run a strong race, it puts Republicans farther back and back on defense. This happened in a few races in 2024 where Republicans were swearing up and down in September that they would never spend in Wisconsin 3 because that's an easy Republican district that they were going to win, to then having to dump in $5 million at the last minute into Wisconsin 3 for Derek Van Orden there. And so I think this is something we are keenly focused on this year, is trying to really work into some of these deeper red districts and see if we can find somebody with an interesting profile that fits the district really well, that can draw an interesting contrast between themselves and the Republican who, even in a Trump plus 15 district, maybe too right wing for the Trump plus 15 district. Because that was similar to the Boebert district, where she was still way too right wing for the way that district voted. So this is something we are really focusing in on this year.
And she comes from a crime family.
We're trying to really focus in on that and, give them the strategic help right now to help build a viable campaign. And we're meeting with candidates in multiple candidates in multiple districts across the country. And as folks declare, are always happy to meet with them to give them initial thoughts on things, because we feel this is a very important thing for us too, especially, again, just going back to the gerrymandering conversation, the map is smaller than it's ever been. So it's on us to find ways to expand it. And that is by running strong candidates and giving them support in much tougher red districts.
Yeah. Well, listen, I really appreciate the energy and effort you're bringing to this.
Of course. Listen, a happy warrior.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, because it's easy to be, down and dejected and just wring your hands and, just clear your optimism and energy comes through. And that's what we really need, because we can't, this is not the time to sit down and rest. We got to stand up and fight.
Well, I'm a big time sore loser, so that's what fuels a lot of it.
Yeah. And one of the things that Moe has talked a lot about is using the rules to our benefit. We don't need to cheat, lie, or steal like they do. But, like we did with Cawthorn, encourage Democrats to make a strategic vote. There wasn't a primary in that congressional race, NC-11 that year. We got Democrats to change registration to vote out Cawthorn. And very proud of that. But Moe and I, to this day, get shit from the Democratic Party for pulling those people off the Democratic rolls. So I think we just need to get a lot more creative. And I agree with you, Moe. CJ, it's a delight. You are a shining light, a star in the sky for me, because I don't hear a lot of this optimism. I don't hear a lot of we're going to win. And I'm confident you're going to. And you're going to be part of the reason that this majority, your donors, team, and everybody at this PAC. But man, you're one of the first people we've had on that has a laser focus. And I really want to thank you for doing that and providing us and our listeners with some positive energy. I'll just say one.
And House Democrats make it easy. House Democrats make it that easy to be positive.
Yeah, that's true.
They run their races.
Really, they've got a really good leadership team too. And I am proud of this Democratic team. And the fact that we don't have a cohesive anti-Trump thing, I think he's going to implode anyway. So just let him implode. Use the Obama rule and let the motherfucker dig his own. But so CJ, we've got a candidate that can win and will win in a tough district still. This is not going to be a cakewalk. It's, Cook is +5 GOP, down from, I think, 9 or 11 when Moe ran 4 years ago. What's your advice to Moe on winning this district? He's learned some lessons since last time. you're an expert. You see good candidates, you see bad candidates. What's the 2 or 3 things that Moe needs to focus on over the next 6 months in this campaign?
Well, Mo, I think you got number one down already. So that's you talk like a normal person. And I think that's really important, right?
Yeah.
When we start using large talking point words that don't mean to anybody, we can lose a captive audience very quickly. Listen, the other thing I would say is focus on these kitchen table issues as much as possible. When we do our ads in general election year, they're talking about what this Republican is doing to make your life more unaffordable, make it tougher for you to have the family and life you want in the American dream. So I think relaying everything, back to this is how Chuck Edwards is raising your costs is probably a smart way forward, and that can be looked through the lens in so many ways. Medicaid, that's a healthcare lens. Home insurance, that's your utility lens. Everything comes back down to people's bank accounts and their wallets, and that's how I like to talk about things, because ultimately everybody's just trying to make it and build the best lives for themselves and their family, and I think that is the best way to communicate to that. And 3, and again, this is something both of you are already doing a great job of, is just calling out Chuck Edwards, making sure he never gets a day of rest is really important, because that breeds mistakes when they feel like the spotlight's always on them. As you both know, with Chuck Edwards hitting a constituent with a clipboard recently, those types of mistakes happen.
With a scotch in the other hand.
Yeah. When those types of things happen, when the heat is always on you, and clearly, folks out in North Carolina 11 did a great job at his town hall a few weeks ago and really holding his fire. That's the type of thing that will cause Chuck Edwards to make more mistakes. And there's nothing that people hate more than being embarrassed by their member of Congress, as we saw with George Santos a few years back.
Yeah.
And Madison
and as we saw, that's one thing.
And Madison Cawthorn, yeah.
Yeah, two things you got to give Chuck credit for. He did show up for the town hall, knowing that he was not pitching to the home team on that one. So I give him credit for that. And number 2, he's kept his pants on. So that's a big improvement over our last congressman. So, but that's about the only 2 things I could think of. But,
that we know of. There's some stuff out there that we're going to get deeper into as this campaign goes on. But
Chuck Edwards better be ready for some more bad news in the upcoming months.
All right.
Well, the last thing we really need is another rich Cadillac driving guy. And come on,
100%. I agree with you.
We can do better than that. All right. Any parting words, CJ? How do folks connect with you? I'll learn more about your organization.
Yeah, our website is thehousemajoritypac.com. You can follow us. We're constantly posting videos of Republicans saying terrible things on our Twitter at House Maj PAC, and same handle for Instagram and for TikTok as well, where we're trying to reach everyone and anyone. And I appreciate the both of you taking the time to have me on. It's great to chat with you.
Well, CJ, it was worth every second. All right. So that's it for this episode of the American Muckrakers podcast. Muck you. I'm David Wheeler signing off. Colonel Moe Davis. If you enjoyed the show, follow us. Share it. Check out AmericanMuckrakers.com for more or to support us. Until next time, keep your eye on the long game. Don't stop believing truth matters. And whenever a MAGA moron annoys you, just tell them, muck you.
This has been Muck You, co-hosted by Colonel Moe Davis in Asheville, North Carolina, and David Wheeler in Spruce Pine, North Carolina. Thanks to our guest today, CJ Warnke of the House Majority PAC. Learn more at theHouseMajorityPAC.com and follow CJ on socials at CJ Warnke. Follow us on Blue Sky under AmericanMuckrakers.com and on Substack at AmericanMuckrakers.substack.com. Muck You is produced by American Muckrakers, copyright 2025. You can learn more and donate at AmericanMuckrakers.com. David and Moe hope you all come back soon for a new episode. And remember to never take shit from anyone, especially Trumpers.